Hey,
Well, welcome in to today's masterclass. We have Tori here from Practice Vital. She's based out of Chicago. She's a group practice owner and also one of the co-founders of a software company called Practice Vital. So we're really excited to see her present some great content on using data to make smarter decisions for your therapy practice. Got that title queued up really well there. And really, we interacted with Tori for the first time at Meet in Kentucky. We had a great dinner and have gotten to know them. We have a lot of TherapyFlow clients already using their software, but I think there's just a big trend in the industry overall of practice owners just taking a much closer look at things like cancellation rates, value for their clinicians, retention per clinicians, because there's so much profit to be made with successfully managing your clinicians or profit to be lost by not successfully managing your clinicians. And it's hard to see positive or negative if you don't know what to look for or know how to track it or what actions to take. So we're really excited for Tori to be coming in here and sharing some of this great content today. And I'll pass it over to her to share a little bit more about you, why you got this process started, and what you'll be going through with us today.
great. Thank you so much, Joshua. It's great to be here. Yeah, as you said, a lot of our customers are also Therapy Flow customers, so we do a lot together. Yeah, and today I'm just hoping to bring a lot of value to all of you. I like to make this as interactive as possible. So, yeah, rather than kind of, multitasking, I hope we can all just kind of be present here today and show up just to get the most out of it. So as Joshua said, I'm Tory Krone. I am a group practice owner in Chicago. I've had a practice for about 9 years. And really, I mean, I should share with you that I decided to major in psychology mostly to avoid numbers. So the irony is not lost on me here that I am the one who's suddenly the data expert talking about data, talking about numbers. But I think that most of us don't come into this field to be real business owners. So a lot of us have had a big learning curve along the way, myself included. So how did I get here? Basically started in 2015. Everything felt pretty easy for the first many years. I had 1099s. It was a small practice. I was kind of like, what's the big deal? Why are people joining all these things to learn more about practice ownership? It really didn't seem that challenging. And then around the time of COVID, my practice expanded, as I'm sure many of yours did. We grew quickly. Everybody switched to telehealth, and I felt like I have no idea what's happening behind closed doors. Our therapists, I used to at least be in the office, and I could tell if people were in their office on time, how many clients were showing up, were they ending their sessions on time? I lost all of that insight when we switched to remote work primarily. Around the same time, I switched to having W-2s from 1099s. A lot of us have gone through that shift, and it had big repercussions. Suddenly, we're offering benefits, and I have to make sure that the numbers work. And all of this happened around the time that I had my third baby in 5 years, and I was on maternity leave, and my practice is growing. And I just was like, I have no idea how my practice is actually doing. It just didn't have a sense. I didn't have the pulse of it. I didn't have the numbers that I needed. So I started to do what most of us do, which is I just started to make spreadsheets. So I had all kinds of spreadsheets, and they were cumbersome to collect the data. I didn't really have a great sense of what to do with the data once I gathered it. And I was doing spreadsheet gymnastics all the time. I was doing pivot tables. I don't know how to do pivot tables, so I was paying people to do this type of thing for me, and it was getting really expensive. And meanwhile, I was seeing all across Facebook groups and in practice owner groups I was part of, just build a dashboard. So I'm a member of the exchange. I don't know if some of you are, but I started to try and follow the directions in there, and it just wasn't for me. It ended up being kind of looking a lot like this, and it was a lot of numbers, a lot of confusion. These were the kinds of images that I was seeing. So the other issue with it was that I had multiple admins, like virtual assistants. Each time a new person would start, we would have to retrain them in these processes. And then I had to have a lot of documentation around how to do those things, how to gather the information. So around this same time, I had a really interesting exit interview with one of the therapists on my team. And she had been with my practice for about 3 years. And hopefully this isn't like giving anybody a migraine just by the light. I was like, maybe I should go back to the last slide so it's not so distracting. But she said in her exit interview, she had a great experience in my practice. She's like, the one feedback that I would give you is that I didn't feel like I had enough information about how I was doing. And this really surprised me because I felt like, well, I feel like I'm the laid back practice owner. I'm being like, everybody see however many sessions, numbers that you want to have. I thought that people would really like that about me, but it turned out that they were actually looking for a bit more structure, more guidance, more feedback. So at about that time, it really hit me. I'm looking for more information, and so are the therapists on my team. We all want more information, and our jobs are unique. They're behind closed doors. We don't know what's going on. There's really no other business where you can do your whole job without somebody knowing how you're doing. Like, think about any other industry. You're at least in meetings with people, you're seeing how things are going, you're seeing how they're presenting. We're just kind of putting somebody, one of our clinicians, in a room with a client who we've worked really hard to get for the practice and hoping for the best. And we think, I know this person and I kind of know their skill set and I interviewed them at one point. They're nice. They're probably doing a good job, but we have to know more about how our practices are doing. So all of my own pain points, my questions, my uncertainties led to the start of Practice Vital. So Practice Vital was founded in 2023, just last year. And I had shared with my husband and a couple other family members about my own pain points, my struggles, my desire for more information about my practice. My husband had a background in technology, and I won't get too deep into the whole story, but it just worked out that all of us started to come together to build this automated dashboard. So there had never been an automated dashboard before. People have manual dashboards set up, but then there's still all the upkeep. It just takes a lot of effort, and then it's all kind of piecemeal still. Even if you see some numbers, it doesn't really tell a complete picture. So I wanted to be able to tell a story. I wanted automation. I wanted it to pull directly from Simple Practice, which is my EHR. So it does that along with a few other EHRs. I wanted it to be secure. So it's a lot more secure than spreadsheets, HIPAA compliant. And I wanted it to be designed specifically for therapy practices. And this just didn't exist. It wasn't out there. So we saw a need, we started to build it. And then now we've grown quite a bit. We have over 250 practices who are using Practice Vital currently. And you can see a little peek into it, but it shares all of the metrics that you need about your practice, tells you about the health of your practice, the health of your clinicians, how they're doing, and the health of your clients. So really it's a win-win-win for everybody in the practice. So today, my hope for our time together is to add as much value for you all so that you can walk away here today and know exactly what metrics that you could be tracking for your practice and why. Be a little less intimidated by data in general, and learn how to use data to make decisions for your practice that will help benefit your practice overall. And I'm going to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have a notepad, you can also just type on your computer. That's fine as well. But I will ask you a few questions about your own practice, just so you're kind of prepared to write some things down. So I want to start by having you zoom out a little bit and think about your own practice for a minute or two. So the reason that we gather data, the reason that we need data is to help us reach our goals, right? That's the whole purpose. We don't want to just kind of gather it without knowing what to do with it. So I want you to think about a goal that you have. This is kind of perfect timing for this meetup. Think about a practice goal that you have, a big picture goal for 2025. An example might be to increase your profit by 5%, to grow by 5 clinicians. And just jot that down when you have it. I also really love to use the chat feature. So if anybody's willing to put things in the chat, I'd love to see what everybody has to say, what your goals are. Anyone willing to put something in there? Mine's always to be more profitable. I think that that's kind of something we have to think about as practice owners. So now step 2 to this is I want you to think about what kinds of challenges you may run into with meeting that goal. What could get in the way of it, or what does get in the way of it? Anyone willing to come off of mute and just share their example? Like, what's your goal and what are some of the challenges?
I think one of our biggest goals is to increase therapeutic alliance with families, because we see that with some clinicians roller coaster up and down, quarter to quarter. It just depends on what's going on and what's affecting them.
So how do you know whether you're doing that or not? Whether the therapists are doing that?
Number of intakes.
Okay.
So we measure number of intakes, and then we measure number of sessions per client.
Great.
I mean, there's an average, and when we see that those clients are being discharged much sooner and not getting the full treatment journey, then that's when we start to notice that we keep giving intakes, but we're not. The turn is way too frequent in discharging than it is intakes.
Perfect. Yep. Yeah, that's great. And I'm glad that you're already tracking it. It's cumbersome to track retention. I know it's very, very challenging, especially manually. But that is one of the things that we track through Practice Vital. It's one of the most important metrics, and we'll talk about that today. Awesome. And Jesse said, goal to hire 2 clinicians and fill their caseload. Okay. Any challenges with that? I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of challenges.
Yeah, the challenge of finding the clients for them, basically. Just how am I going to fill them up? Ad spend, marketing, things like that.
Totally. Yeah. So that's where Joshua comes in. Yeah, I think, filling the caseload is a huge challenge. And then if you go to all that effort of spending on marketing and outreach, you want to make sure those clients stick around or it's not worth it, right? So that's where the retention comes in and the importance of measuring that. Okay, so some of the common challenges that practice owners are facing with meeting their goals. This is stuff that I hear every day. We have thin margins. We don't have enough time in the week. So, I have all these goals. I have ideas. We want to hire. We want to work on marketing, but I don't have the time. Clinicians not meeting expectations. So how do I get them to meet their expectations? We have these expectations. They're not doing it. So how can we make a profit? Clinician burnout and turnover, and not enough referrals. So that tends to be a lot of the common challenges. So to tackle any of these challenges, we need data. We also need to know how to use the data that we do have to make more informed decisions. So again, it doesn't make a lot of sense to just gather data. And this is something I hear a lot from our customers is like, well, we have been tracking data, but then it takes so much time that we don't have any time left to actually make an improvement because of the data or to do anything different. And so if we're spending all the time gathering it and we're not doing anything with it, there's really no point in gathering it. We have to know how to use it. So as practice owners, how can data help us? Any thoughts? How does data help you run a better business? Are you tracking data?
I would say, just as Suzanne suggested, it helps to know whether we're meeting benchmarks, right? Like, these are norms. Are we above the norm? Are we below the norm? Are we at the norm?
Yeah.
Make decisions from there.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that goes alongside KPIs as well. Like, you want your supervisors, your therapists, everybody to have benchmarks or goals in mind, and then they need to track against those individually as well. So you have it at the practice level, the supervisor level, and then the therapist level. Great. So we'll go through how data can help us. I think it's important to just kind of talk about some of the benefits, especially since data has been kind of a four-letter word in our field. And so really being able to understand the value of it, I think is important to get that buy-in around it. So data helps signal what needs to change or where to intervene. So an example would be you might have a clinician who's averaging only 17 sessions per week, and they're expected to see 23. So we're unsure what's getting in the way. It could be that we don't have enough referrals. It could be that we have plenty of referrals, but the therapist isn't rebooking those clients and they're slipping through the cracks. It could be that they're lacking in clinical skills. And so those clients are, as Suzanne was saying, those clients are churning quickly. They're coming in and then they're gone. Depending on the data that we see, those are very different. They should lead to very different decisions for our practice. So if the issue is that we don't have enough referrals, we want to increase our marketing spend, we want to do more outreach, we want to work on acquiring more clients. If the issue is that there's a high cancellation rate, let's say, for a therapist, or they're not rebooking often, or they have low retention, then that leads to very different decisions that we should be making. We should be leaning into coaching those therapists. We should lean into giving them some of the skills around how to sell themselves to clients, how to tell the client about the client journey, about the therapy journey. Even educating clients is a small tweak, but it could be, hey, did you know that therapy is really not very effective unless you stay for 8 sessions? That's how you're going to be more likely to meet your treatment outcomes. So we have to have the data to know where we need to go next. So data allows us to provide clear feedback and more targeted coaching for our whole team. It can help us give coaching to our intake coordinator. Hey, this clinician has a high churn rate. That can be a sign of a mismatch between a therapist and clients that they're getting. Maybe we need to give different kinds of intakes to this therapist. Let's look through their caseload and see the last 4 clients who terminated prematurely. What was it about those clients? Maybe they all had eating disorders and the clinician is not very skilled in eating disorder treatment. And so we can either get them more training or we can provide more different referrals for them. So data enables us to be proactive, not reactive, when it may be too late. Thanks for the little fire sign. I love knowing you're here with me. We probably all had issues in our practice that we've let go on for months or even years without realizing it. So we had a customer recently. We give everybody a free coaching session who becomes a member or a customer of Practice Vital. And so I look in their data with them, talk through the data and say what changes I see that they could make. So they had a clinician who they realized had 40% retention. So meaning 60% of the time, clients are not staying for 8 sessions. So they said to me, oh my gosh, I thought this was a great clinician. And so, I bet something changed. So we looked back at their data for the previous 2 years, same thing. So they're like, oh my gosh, I wish that I had caught this earlier. We've lost so many clients. We looked at the number of clients that this clinician had seen over the past year, and it was like 100 clients, which is a significant number, right? They could have had 5 different therapists who each had a caseload of 25, basically, instead of having one person who's losing all of these clients. Data helps to empower clinicians to make changes themselves. So show of hands here, how many of you are sharing data with your clinicians at least once a month? Okay, so we have a little bit of work that we can do. So the thing is that if clinicians don't have data, they don't know what to change. So, we only know, data tells us what to make improvements around. So if they have the data, then they can be empowered to make changes themselves, and it doesn't have to come from you. You don't want to be tracking down your therapist all the time saying, hey, did you realize you're not hitting your utilization quota? You want them to have that information so that they can easily make that change themselves. A lot of them genuinely think that they are meeting their quota. And the problem is if you tell them at the end of the quarter, let's say, this is how many sessions you had and this is how many you were supposed to have, it's too late for them to make a change. They're just going to feel discouraged. But if you're sharing that with them every week and showing little changes, like, well, now you're averaging 15, now you're averaging 16, then they can course correct before it's too late. I like data too because it takes emotion out of the conversation. We're all feelers here. We want to make people feel good. And I think we struggle with sometimes giving feedback that's difficult to share. But if you can share data that comes from a third party and it's coming from technology, it's not coming from you. You're not just sending them a number that they don't know where it came from. Like, I think that's tough for clinicians to just get an email that says, hey, you're averaging this many, and they kind of think, well, where is that coming from? But if they can see their own data in a visually appealing way that makes sense to them, they're more motivated to make changes. And then the last one here is it helps us incentivize and reward what we want to see more of. So I've found that practice owners tend to reward the folks who are not always contributing the most to the practice. Sometimes it's just who's asked for a raise, who barks the loudest essentially. And then it's like, okay, well, I like this person. I want to keep them on my team, so I'll give them a raise. A lot of times when you have the data, you'll actually be really surprised. And you could say, wow, this pre-licensed clinician is actually retaining 90%. This is true in my practice. This happened where pre-licensed clinician was retaining 90% of their clients. I would have had no idea. Like, he's not the most personable. Like, it just doesn't strike me as somebody who was going to be like, oh, every client loves you. Like, I figured he was a good therapist, but I didn't think that so many people would really gravitate to this person. Whereas I had somebody on my team in the past who isn't in our team anymore, but she had 15 years experience, super seasoned, came in. I gave her the most out of anyone that they can make at my practice, thinking, oh, this is going to be a really top clinician. She was not retaining clients. Her churn rate was high. I would never have known without the data. And it's not like that was the only thing I was using, but all the data together tells a story. She wasn't meeting expectations. She was canceling on clients all the time. All of that together told me, wow, I want to be rewarding this pre-licensed clinician. I actually would rather pay them more and have them stick around. So we need the data in order to understand all of those things. So take a minute, maybe 30 seconds, just jot down what data you're collecting for your practice as of now. And then maybe below each metric that you are tracking, write down why you're tracking that, if you are. So what is the purpose in tracking utilization? What is the purpose in tracking retention? Again, if you're willing to share in the chat, feel free.
Or maybe some of the practice owners share, I don't own a therapy practice right now, so we're not tracking some of these pieces, right, for our clinicians, or we're tracking it for other components of the business. And
Sure.
This is one of those pieces that I think I told a practice owner last week, there are therapy industry specific problems that as a therapist only you confront, and sort of the nature of retention is incredibly unique in this space, but retention, cancellation rates, but just that concept of retention is a business problem every business has to figure out.
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
any industry. And so
For sure.
we track it and we do work
Yeah.
against that. And it's almost one of those things like an aha moment as like a good business owner of like, oh, every business has to figure this out. and figure out a way
Right.
to track it and implement a solution here. The
Mhm.
unique thing in the therapy space is your retention isn't driven by the software you use or some of those things. It's driven by the person in the seat doing therapy often. Like that's a little bit
Mhm.
different. So
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. And with Practice Vital, I mean, I think it's a lot more useful for group practices. You can track a lot of data about other clinicians, about your team as a whole, the health of your practice. But we do have individuals who just they want to know how their practice is doing just themselves as a solo practice. Um, we do have a number of people who are just, I want to know how many sessions I'm doing each month. I don't want to calculate that. I want to know how many of my clients are staying for how long, what the average is, all of those things. So okay, so some of the vital metrics to track. This is just some of what we track in Practice Vital and what I would recommend that all of you track. So we're going to go through each of these one by one, and I'll give you kind of a definition, some of the industry standards around these, and then talk about how you can use each of these metrics to level up your practice, to make better decisions. So starting with this one, I think every practice needs to be tracking this at a bare minimum. So this is essentially productivity. Some people call it my clinician's productivity or how many sessions I'm averaging per week. The other definition is utilization. Utilization we're defining as the percentage of this. So it's basically this 18.3 out of 25 sessions per week is 74%. So that's what utilization is. You can also think of it as their productivity or the percentage of what they should be completing in a week. A lot of people track this week by week in terms of the number completed of sessions each week, but then they don't average it. And the problem with that is that, again, a lot of clinicians think, well, there were weeks that I hit 20 and my goal is 20, so I must be averaging 20. They don't really factor in, and it's not that they're trying to like not hit expectations. They truly don't know. They're like, oh, but there were also many weeks where I was on vacation. There were weeks in the summer where I was averaging 10. And so altogether, that really gets me to 18. And so I'm not hitting the number that I need to be hitting. And they have to have that information in order to make any changes. And it's important for their own compensation. Like they want to make sure that they're making a healthy salary. And if they don't hit those numbers, it's unlikely that they will. So very important to be tracking this to know if they're hitting expectations. Again, it's cumbersome to track on an average basis. But again, I think you have to do it more proactively. You can't wait until the end of the quarter. Some of the decisions that you might make around this, when to hire. So how well utilized your team is. If everybody's at above 70% utilization, then maybe you want to bring somebody else on, or let's say all your therapists are around 95% utilized and your newest hire is at 70%, that's usually when I think it's a good time to bring somebody else on. Also tells you who's deserving of a raise or a bonus, right? Are they meeting expectations? The next one is active clients. So you can think of this as basically their caseload. In all of the EHRs, there's usually a list of clients, and then we rely on therapists to deactivate people in the EHR. But what we find is that most clinicians batch deactivate, meaning that they forget about it, and then 2 months go by and they think, oh, none of these 10 people are my clients anymore. Deactivate, deactivate, deactivate. And the problem with that is that then the intake coordinator, whoever's staying on top of caseload management, thought they had 50 clients, but really suddenly they have 40 or 30. And then that's a problem because then the clinician is saying, actually, I need 10 new referrals all at once. And that's really tricky. So we want to know active clients. In Practice Vital, we look at the number based on who had an appointment in the last 60 days. So we're really looking at the calendar and we're counting those up for you automatically. As a little bit of a recommendation, I like to make sure that this number, the active clients number, is roughly 2 times your weekly expectation for your therapist. So an example of that would be if you expect them to see 25, or for yourself, if you're a solo practitioner, if you expect yourself to see 25 clients per week or have 25 completed sessions, you would need a caseload or active clients of around 50. It could be between 1.8 and 2 times that amount. That's because you're always going to have clients who are terminating. You're going to have fluctuations in caseload, and then some clients are going to come infrequently. So you need to have enough people active. Otherwise, it's unlikely you're going to hit that productivity quota or that utilization goal.
Tory, do you see that changing across like modalities or even types of service sets at all? So we're talking about that, it's a good general recommended number,
Yeah.
but what does that translate to our couples counselors, our anxiety, or our eating
Sure.
disorder? Any other
Sure.
further insight you can share there?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think that like people who work more with psychodynamic, like as an orientation, it might be more that you need a smaller caseload, partly because they might be terminating less often. I think that, with kids, you're maybe on the higher side of it because they have a lot more cancellations and, things with school that might come up. But that's kind of been the rule of thumb that we've found. I think what's really useful is that if you have Practice Vital or another system, when you can easily compare across all clinicians, you can see what sort of the norm is at your practice. Like how many are active typically in a month at our practice. And that can really give you your own benchmark. But that has been some of the beauty of Practice Vital, that we have this data that's never been gathered before. And so we want to start doing a lot more with it to be able to share with the community and kind of be the experts in like, hey, this is the industry standard based on our customers who make up a lot of the customers out there, or a lot of the therapy practices. So some of that I don't have like at my fingertips, but I'd like to be able to investigate that a little bit more.
Nice. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Rebooking rate is helpful. So from a clinical and a business perspective, you want to make sure that clients aren't slipping through the cracks. If therapists are just scheduling week by week, it's more challenging. So if you kind of say to a client, hey, reach out when you're ready, or email me next week and we'll set up a time, it's very unlikely that will happen. And it's easy for them to slip through the cracks, or maybe even just 3 weeks go by, everybody gets busy, they forget until then they're like, oh gosh, I'm having a hard day. Now I'm going to reach out to my therapist. So if it's not on the calendar, it likely won't happen. If clinicians have a full caseload and they're not rebooking with their current clients, you don't want to just keep assigning new clients to them. That's where they end up with like 100 active clients, but nobody's actually coming in. So we just want to make sure that we're really utilizing the client base that we have, or we're closing it out. And I talked to one customer who said that they have a clinician who has like 100 active clients at any time. They keep taking in new clients, but then they're telling their current clients they don't have room to see them because they don't have enough openings. So I know I had the same expression. I was kind of like, well, that's not good for the clients. They can't get in to see their therapist. And they're like, I know, we just have a wait list. So we just keep like, trying to help the clients and bring in new people. But ultimately, that's not good for anybody. So having this data help them be like, oh, you're right. These clients aren't even getting to be retained. They're not hitting their treatment outcomes. Okay, so next one, cancellation rate. Super important, not like the sexiest metric to track, but it's really vital. So it's an issue of continuity of care. If clients are coming, if let's say they cancel every 3 sessions, they're not getting what they need. And then from a business perspective, you're just not being very efficient. It's very hard, as you all know, to fill somebody's opening, even if they give you a week's notice. Like I don't have clients who are sitting around who can come at that person's 10 o'clock time one time, like then I'll end up like the guy who's seeing 100 clients. I have my certain caseload that I'm pulling from. And so it really impacts my compensation or my therapist compensation if clients are canceling frequently. We want to teach our clients about that. So we need to know our cancellation rate in order to educate them about what's happening. And Also, if we see that a clinician is canceling frequently, that's a sign that they might be struggling with burnout or other areas of their life that are interfering with their ability to fully show up for their clients. I've also found, based on seeing this data really easily, that if clinicians are canceling frequently, and we separate out clinician cancellations from client cancellations in Practice Vital, but if you see that clinicians are canceling often, you'll find that their clients are canceling often. It's just like, oh, well, you don't take it so super seriously. It's like if a friend cancels on you frequently, you're like, okay, well, I kind of have a headache too. Maybe I'll cancel on you this time. It's no big deal. But I think that we both have to like hold up our end of the deal with being committed to the process. The other decision that you can make using cancellation rate is that it's very different. Yeah, then you never see each other again in the chat. It's very different per clinician. So I'll see in some practices that one clinician might have a 10% cancellation rate, another one has a 30% cancellation rate. I don't want to tell both of those clinicians the same number of clients that they need to be scheduling per week. The one who has 10% cancel should schedule only 10% more clients. The one who has 30% cancel really needs to be scheduling 30% more, above and beyond the number that they're expected to see, so that they can hit that weekly quota. So having that data can give us a sense of like, okay, I'm supposed to see 25 clients. I really need to schedule 30. Okay, so churn rate. A lot of people aren't familiar with this metric. That you can think of this as the revolving door metric. So it basically means that a client has come in and only stayed for 1 to 3 sessions, and then they're churned. So they basically have an intake, maybe one more session, and then they think this isn't for me. The reason that people have a high churn rate, and again, a high churn rate is not what you want. That means a lot of clients are leaving quickly. One reason could be that it's not a good fit between the clinician and the therapist. So the intake coordinator is sending the wrong types of referrals to this clinician. The clinician might be experiencing burnout. It's one of the first things I see if a clinician isn't really doing well themselves, that they're just kind of like, they're not invested in the client. They're not showing that investment from the start. Sometimes they just don't know how to sell themselves. They don't know how to show the client that they don't know how to give them confidence in them as a therapist. So, part of our job is to tell a client, I'm confident I can help you. Here's what we need to do to help you. Here's what I see as the problem. Here's our journey. Here's the path to get there. If they don't do that, clients are going to not have buy-in. If it's just an assessment and they don't give them any hope, they're not going to come back. So sometimes it's a very small tweak that you can give the clients or give the therapists on your team to share with the clients that will make a big impact. We know that if clients come for less than 4 sessions, they're definitely not going to hit their treatment outcomes. They're not going to get what they wanted to get out of therapy. They're going to have not had a good experience. From a business standpoint, high churn rate is very costly. So all that money that you're putting in to acquire a new client, it doesn't pay off. Joshua, do you have not to put you on the spot, but do you have a number in terms of like a break-even point that you're aware of for clients, number of sessions clients would need to stay in order to kind of pay off from a business standpoint?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is it always depends. Largely it depends on where you're having to spend your marketing dollars and how much, because some, let's say, cash pay practices in a highly competitive area, one of their only options might be to spend more on Google ads, and they will, spend several $100s to acquire one client. And but on the flip side, you also work in a non-competitive market and you've got above average session fee, your cost, right, in session 1, session 2. Attilio was running some numbers. He'll pop in a second here, but we have a lot of practices that they make money even after they pay their clinician on session 1. But I'd say most practices that happen somewhere between session 4 and session 7.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard the same. Thank you for echoing that. I
Yeah.
know.
Julio, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'll hop in just for a couple seconds too.
Yeah.
It very much has to do with your like average profit margins and how much you're choosing to spend. We're seeing some practices, I'd say like the average practice, like an average growing practice is getting a return at like session 3 and beyond, honestly. But there are some outstanding practices that have a return before at the first session. And the common trend seems to be if they're just honestly spending a lot on marketing. If they're spending a lot, the higher acquisition you have, the less churn is actually involved. So you can imagine if you're getting like 100 new clients in a month, you actually break even on the first session.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, it is kind of weird. We put together a little calculator that shows it, and you can kind of take a look at that per practice. But it is a weird relationship in the therapy world because of how the sessions are staggered.
Right. And it's something that most of us haven't really thought of, or I hadn't really thought of before doing all of this, that like you don't make money off of the first session. And then there's time spent filling out paperwork. There's time that your intake coordinator is verifying benefits, communicating back and forth. All of that is costly for the practice. One more point on churn, just because I thought this was really interesting, that I read a study where therapists were asked to identify the 3 most stressful patient behaviors for their practice. Number 1 was having suicidal statements from clients, obviously very stressful for the therapist. Number 2 was aggression and hostility from patients or clients. Number 3 was premature termination. So, meaning that when clients drop out, we have a lack of closure, we feel ineffective. It's kind of like sometimes a rejection for therapists. I know we can't necessarily take it that way, but I think that it's very hard on therapists, and it can lead to greater burnout. So we want to do everything we can for both the therapist and the client to keep them in treatment. We need to help make that happen. So again, we need to be tracking churn rate. Otherwise, we're going to have no way to know whether all of this is happening. Retention rate. So again, this is one that I think is essential for practices to track, and yet it's super cumbersome to track. And I haven't met somebody yet who's been able to stay on top of it and like really, because we run out of time doing it. It takes a lot of time. So client retention is the number of visits to achieve beneficial treatment outcomes, and it's considered 8 is the industry standard, 8 or more sessions. So we want clients to stay in therapy at least for 8 sessions. And then the industry standard around that is that you want that to happen 70% of the time. So we know it's unlikely going to happen 100% of the time. There's always one-off situations. There's times when maybe it isn't a good fit, or the client has to go to a higher level of care. So that accounts for that 30%, but we want it to be at least 70% of the time that clients are staying and retaining and being retained. Retention strongly supports the business's sustainability. Client retention is the life force of a thriving practice. It's a sign of a strong therapeutic relationship. Going back to what Suzanne was saying, it's really about the therapeutic alliance. And so if you're working on that, that can be really helpful. And it's a sign of client engagement and an indication that they are satisfied with what's happening and that they're more likely to hit their treatment goals. So in terms of decisions that you can make around retention rate, I mean, I think first of all, we have to know the retention rate for each of our therapists. And then if a clinician's retention rate is low, I start with basic coaching. So specific coaching around retention, like I said before, you can have some kind of basic changes that make a really big impact. One customer we had started creating welcome bags for their new clients, and they told them about the journey, the therapeutic journey. Like, here's a little bit of information about therapy. For those who don't know about therapy, it takes at least eight sessions, a weekly commitment. It's a commitment like anything else. You don't want to just cancel because you're sad that day. Like that is the day to go to therapy. So sometimes it's just giving some tips around it that can make a big impact. If that doesn't help my clinicians to improve their retention rate, then I'm going to work on things like offering additional supervision. Ask them to record a session with a client and really see what they're doing in action and give some coaching and feedback around that. If that doesn't help, I'm going to administer a performance improvement plan, get more specific. I might hold off on assigning new clients. Because if I'm just assigning more and more clients to somebody who can't keep those clients, it's really detrimental to my business. It's detrimental to the clients too. They're not getting what they came for. The next one is revenue. I think we all have to know our revenue for our businesses, whether or not you're solo or a group practitioner. We have to know whether a service is worth running. Are we making enough to have a healthy profit margin? And then many CFOs are using Practice Vital data actually to create projections around what somebody will be making in the future, telling them decisions tied to that revenue. So this service doesn't make sense. This group isn't profitable, but we have to have our revenue data. Another thing Practice Vital looks at, which you should be tracking, is average revenue per session. So you want to know your average revenue per session on a practice-wide level, as well as therapist by therapist level. So in here, you can see the practice average for this demo practice is 129. And then you can see if, like Patrick here, is falling short of that, does that mean that we should give him higher payers so that he can have a higher compensation? Let's say if you're doing a percentage split or commission split for therapists, you don't want one person averaging 107, 60% of that or 50% of that, if another one is averaging 174 just based on who you happen to give to them. So that can be really useful to know that. If you're paying a flat hourly rate, as I recommend a lot of people do, it's just so much easier. Then you can see these amounts in real time and know what is the actual average across all of our payers. What are we actually bringing in? And now if I'm going to take a percent of that, like 50%, I can do it based on an educated number, based on what I actually know that we're bringing in on average. So a lot of decisions around compensation can be made using that data. I might kind of go through this one quickly. I want to make sure we have time for questions, but looking at trends across groups can be really helpful for making decisions. So seeing one location against another location, for example, knowing the utilization of each location, then is it time to hire? Do we need to do more marketing for this location because just this location is falling short? So should we, increase our Google Ads spend for that location? So we also group by supervisor so that you can make decisions around who to promote. A lot of times people are finding out that they've promoted the people that maybe shouldn't have been the people they promoted. I think I said that earlier. So kind of an overview again of what we just covered. The right data can help you in all of these different ways. Without it, I think it's really hard to make any decisions for our practice. And I want to make sure that we have time for questions. So I'll open it up if anybody just wants to ask anything. Any questions? It's a lot of information. Some of you might know a lot of this, and some of it might be really new and hopefully doesn't feel too overwhelming. The good news is if you do have an automated dashboard for it, it does it all for you. So you don't have to worry about gathering it. You don't have to worry about figuring out what it all means. you know, a lot of it's kind of built into the tool for you.
I have a question. Excuse me. How I'm trying to figure out how to say the question. If we are not seeing our clients weekly, we have biweekly, we have monthly. How is that impacting the churn rate and the retention rate?
Sure, good question. Yeah, so at least in Practice Vital, we measure it where at any point, if a client becomes retained for 8 sessions, they'll then move into kind of the retained bucket. You can set, at least in Practice Vital, you can set the number of days that you expect there to be between sessions. So that, for example, if you want to give a new client 16 weeks to have 8 sessions, that would give them 2 weeks to have each session. Or it would say that they're expected to come basically weekly when they start up as a client, but that they could have some cancellations along the way, and they can still, we're giving them 16 weeks to get to that 8-week mark. The last thing I'll say is that we look at retention and churn only for new intakes. So we're looking at a period of time, let's say this year, and we're only measuring the clients who started this year, if that's the time frame we're looking at. So if clients, typically when a client first starts, they're coming on a weekly basis, presumably, or roughly weekly. They don't start off as a monthly client, at least in most practices. They become the monthly client because they're doing well. So they probably wouldn't be factored into the retention at all, except for in historic data, if that makes sense, because they're not a new client who's starting out once a month. So they would show up in maybe 2022 data when you first started seeing them, and they were coming weekly at that time, and so they show up as retained. It doesn't matter now that they're coming once a month, because we're looking at that first 8-week period or first 16-week period that they became a client. It makes a lot more sense when you see your own data in the system and you can click into the information bubbles and you see exactly what's happening there. Other questions?
I have another one. Sorry, I
Sure.
like this stuff. So this is really fascinating.
That's great.
I had a chance
I
to
love
look
that
at
you
ours
like it.
already. Yeah. So when I'm looking at cancellation rate, and we have a policy that says you have, if you cancel outside of the 24 hours, you can cancel and reschedule, or cancel the session with no penalty. If
Sure.
you miss or cancel within 24 hours, then that's a different story. I mean, there's other fees or other things that occur from there. How are you, when we gather that information, how do we separate, or can we separate therapist cancellation versus client cancellation? And then we throw in that next level of how do you measure out the client canceled this session but rescheduled it to later in the week or the following Monday or whatever that is.
Yeah.
So that it isn't truly a cancel. It's only canceled on your calendar, but not truly a cancel because it's been scheduled within that reasonable time frame.
Yeah, no, I'm tracking. That all makes sense to me. So we, at least with Practice Vital, we have a number of ways of tracking cancellations so that you can see a breakdown based on late cancellations, clinician cancellations, client cancellations. What I advise customers to do is that if a client is rescheduling and it's the same week of their appointment, so they're not missing, there's no lost continuity of care. You drag the appointment in the EHR, it's not counted as a cancellation. I understand what you're saying, that you want to track those, but I wouldn't even count it as a cancellation because they are getting in that same week. There's no lost revenue. There's no real impact besides, a clinician has to move the time. So that's one way I recommend that you do it. If they say, I have a dentist appointment, see you next week, then I count it as a cancellation, and I would just do a regular client cancellation. But yeah, we give kind of best practice advice around those things, but every practice does it so differently too. But we do track those billable late cancellations separate from the scheduled cancellations.
I think sometimes the challenge can be if you've got a parent that has scheduled out to the end of the year, let's say to the end of the school year, and the client ends up graduating sooner than anticipated because they've done so well with the consistency of care.
Oh yeah.
Now we've got, if we're going out later into time, now we've got those cancellations because we don't take them off the calendar at that point. They're just marked out. Now that's canceling. Yeah, so that counts now as, I would consider, like a negative impact on the clinician if the client has graduated, but now you're counting that white space as being canceled, if that makes sense. So then we just have to talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, if you can, I would just have the therapist be really mindful of, if a client ends, don't just keep them on your calendar. I mean, I don't think that's best practice in a lot of ways, because then we're just seeing in their EHR record, canceled, when really they terminated, they ended, they graduated. So we don't want those repeating. They just have to delete the recurring appointment. So I would strongly recommend that, not just because of the cancellation rate that it negatively impacts, but because it's not accurate data in the EHR. All right, I see that we're at the end of the hour, so I want to give everybody a chance to get to their next sessions, meetings, etc. But thank you so much for having me. It was great to be here and get to know all of you a bit. So if you want to reach us at all, practicevital.com is our website. You can fill out the contact form and do a free demo with me. Like I said, there's a free coaching component of it. So yeah, month-to-month subscription. And we integrate with Therapy Notes, Simple Practice, Practice Q, and Theranest right now.
That's great. Tori, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Wealth of knowledge that you shared today. If you're catching the replay, there will be relevant links to make your way to Practice Vital around as well. And it probably won't be the last time that you all see or hear from Tori or the team at Practice Vital, as we continue to have a lot more conversations about all of these data numbers on the back office side of things for your therapy practice. Thanks again, Tori.
Thank you.
Glad you can make it.
Yeah, thanks so much. Have a great day and weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.